Hello, welcome to Crops TV. I'm Ben Covington, test engineer at Iowa State University, part of the Digital Ag Group. Today, we're going to talk through Strip Till 101. So, when I start to think about strip till, it's an operation in which we remove the residue away from the row in which we're going to be planting the seed. Basically, we can call that targeted tillage. Rather than removing all the residue the full width of our implement, we're only going to remove that on a small area, probably only about a third of the field. That means that we are only going to disturb 1/3 of the field as we go through with our tillage implement. When we're doing this, there's different methods that we can use, but we can also add things such as fertilizer and nutrients into the row. That's what strip till means to me. Let's talk about some pros and cons with strip till. The first one being is that we're going to go ahead and make a zone where we can plant our seeds, and we're still going to be able to leave residue in the field. This is going to be very helpful because in the zone that we create, we're going to have a nice warm seed bed for that seed to be placed. It will also help by keeping the soil nice and moist throughout the season. That's where that extra little bit of residue comes into place. When we prepare that seed bed, we can also go through and do some fertilizer placement. This is going to put the nutrients exactly where those nice little roots are going to need them the most. Ultimately, when we do a strip till pass, there's a good chance that we can reduce an additional pass with another piece of equipment in the field, saving not only on our tractor time and usage, but also with fuel and labor. One thing that might come into play when we're talking about strip till is that we might need to have a better GPS system. That's going to be able to be there to make sure that when we do that tillage pass, we can plant the seed exactly where that strip till bar or rig went before it. Without having a guidance system, that's where we might have some issues, that the planter might drift on and off of those predetermined tilled rows. Number one, it's the equipment. What's going to make the equipment different is the fact that the equipment is designed only to till a small area, compared to what a typical tillage pass is, which would encompass the entire width of the piece of tillage equipment. Tractor size is also very important. That's going to be determined by the number of row units that you have on your strip till rig, as well as the type of strip till units. If it is a knife unit, that can typically be pulled at a slower speed, causing a less requirement of horsepower. If we are going to be looking at a Coulter style machine, that is going to probably be pulled at a higher speed. With the higher speed, we're probably going to need a little bit more horsepower. A Coulter style unit is going to be consuming about 40 horsepower per row unit, where a knife style, you're looking at 22. Another thing to consider is if you're going to be putting fertilizer out with your machine, you probably will be towing some type of fertilizer cart or apparatus. This cart has weight, and that additional weight will also require a little bit more horsepower. Fluid hydraulics on the tractor are also extremely important. Any type that we're going to be pneumatically conveying a type of dry fertilizer, we're going to need a higher flow in our tractor to be able to get that vacuum or fan to be able to distribute that fertilizer the width of the machine. A liquid style version, probably not going to need as much hydraulic capacity as if we're doing dry product conveyance. If this is your first time trying strip till, the equipment's pretty important, but that doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy a brand new piece of equipment right off the bat. Try and find somebody in your area that is already doing strip till. If so, hopefully they can be an ambassador for your operation and allow you to borrow or demo some of the equipment. If not, you can always start off by using used equipment such as an inline ripper or maybe an anhydrous bar, as long as those shanks are set to the adequate spacing that you would use to match up with your planter. Speed costs horsepower. The faster we go, the bigger the tractor we need to have on the front of it. Each one of these row units is basically going to require close to 40 horsepower per row unit. That one over there, that's a parabolic shank style. We could never pull that one that fast. We have to pull it a lot slower. We're going to pull that one anywhere between the 5.5 to 6 miles an hour, and we're only going to look between 28 to 30 horsepower per row unit for that one over there. So, horsepower is a big deal. GPS is extremely important when it comes to strip till. If we do not have adequate GPS, then there's a good chance our planter might drift on and off of those rows, and well, that just becomes no-till at that point. When I start to think of a good GPS system, I want to make sure that the implement behind is going to track appropriately with the tractor. If I use a 3-point hitch style strip till bar, there's a good chance the GPS on the tractor will be perfectly fine. Now, with that being said, I would also want to make sure that the GPS on the top of the tractor is going to get me probably within 4 inches of where I think I'm going to be planting. If I'm going to have a drawn implement, that's where I might want to start to consider having a secondary receiver placed on that implement. With that, both the receivers can communicate together to make sure that we're driving as straight as possible and putting those rows and zones right where they need to be. A herbicide plan is definitely something we want to consider if we're going to be switching into a strip till operation. Really what that comes down to is our first initial pass with our burn down herbicide. Sometimes our herbicides today require to have that integration of mixing soil and herbicide together. If we're going to be doing targeted tillage with a strip till rig, we're not going to be able to incorporate the entirety of that field. That's where I would want to make sure that I worked with my local ag retailer to make sure that the product that we're spraying out there is the right product and it does not need to be incorporated across the entirety of the field. A little bit of adaptation to that herbicide plan might come in with an additional post-emerge sprayer pass, as well as maybe using some residual herbicides. Within our herbicide plan, I would definitely think that we'd need to recommend using our full rates for the herbicides that we apply. A reduction in rate might cause an additional bloom of weeds that we were not expecting. Sometimes I get a lot of questions about the timing of our strip till passes. Spring versus fall, and which one is better for this operation? Well, before I can make that determination, I have to start to think through. When do I have more time? Do I have more time following my fall harvest, or do I have more time in the spring? Typically, I would tell you that fall strips are very forgiving. In the fall, we have a longer season and a longer window before our ground freezes. This gives us ample opportunity to go out there with our strip till rig and create the zones for next year's planting. If I wait till the spring to be able to make our zones, I might find an issue with extra moisture. With this being said, that is one of the biggest downfalls that I can find with strip till is not creating a good zone. If you create a zone in wet conditions, you are going to open yourself up for large clods that our planter has a hard time overcoming. If you do tillage in the fall, here in central Iowa, we typically have cold enough winters that those clods can break down over the season prior to planting. When I also think about things breaking down, I want to think about my fertilizer as well. If I'm applying a P or a K, fall and spring, that is perfectly fine. However, if I need to add nitrogen into my zones or my strips, that is something that I typically would like to do in the spring. For example, I would have a really hard time justifying going out in the winter or in the fall and applying a urea-based product through my strip till rig. However, the spring would be perfectly fine for that application. Some strip till rigs do have the ability to be able to tow an anhydrous system. With that being said, that might be a little bit more advantageous for you and your operation to use a strip till bar to put on your fall applied anhydrous instead of saving that for the spring.
We made these zones 2 days ago. I'm starting to look to see what it actually looks like on the top. First thing that I start to notice is these really big clods, right? That's a massive chunk of soil right there. For the farmers in the group, right? Is this what we want to plant our seed into? Big clods? No, absolutely not, right? We're looking for very good seed soil contact, right? We want to make sure that corn seed can be able to suck up that moisture and start that germination process. When we have massive clods like this, it's very hard to get that good establishment, okay? Next thing that I'm going to start to look for, I start to see a lot of residue, right? It's kind of hard to tell that row over there even got tilled. Ultimately, I know it did, but there's a lot of residue on the top. If I'm going to start thinking through my operation, I would not want to see that in the spring. I would rather have it a clean zone with the residue moved away. That residue is going to act as a straw. When that kernel of corn or soybean starts to abide that moisture, if we have straw or a corn stalk or soybeans next to it, it's going to wick any of that moisture away. That's going to lead to poor germination and ultimately a very staggered emergence, okay? So, man, Ben's hitting pretty hard on this tool over here. It's not really looking that great. Well, Ben also can do a little bit of math for finances as well. This one is going to be significantly cheaper than that one over there. So, I have to think through my operation. Is this the tool for me? Ultimately, if I have a lot of time in the fall, yeah, I'll go ahead and pull this thing out, make a couple strips, and let them overwinter. Then I'll be perfectly fine to go plant back into it and then that next spring. But before I do that, I want to make sure that my planter is going to be set up to be able to handle it. When I see residue like that, I want to make sure that my planter has a set of row cleaners that can easily move that residue out of the way and when we put and open up that furrow, okay? But that's just what the top looks like. The top is only a small portion of our farming aspect. We need to walk back over here to these flags and start to see what the soil looks like after that shank actually went through the ground. Levi Powell, my counterpart, he came out on the other class and he actually came through with our leaf blower and he blew the loose soil away here in this zone. One of the things that we started to notice is that this trench seems pretty narrow. It's maybe only a hand width wide, not exactly a full 10-inch zone. Well, in order to counteract it, we need to make a better seed bed. In order to make a better seed bed, let's go on over to the other machine. So as we started to walk over here, we can tell that these strips look a little different, don't they? Right? What's one of the first things that we see? Go ahead, tell me, Tim. Smaller clods, right? It's a lot flatter on the top. There's little tinier clods than what we saw over on the other side. That's going to be all determined by the actual method of tillage. So instead of using a shank, this tool behind me uses 3 different wavy coulter blades. And as it goes through the ground, it's going to act a lot more like a vertical till tool. It's actually going to be able to cut that soil and then lift it back up into the air. When I get down and I start to dig, one of the things that I'm going to notice is that it's fully tilled the whole entire width of that 10-inch zone. Compared to the other side over there, we just made one little slit. What that does, gives me some of that confidence going to plant back in it that next spring, that, you know what, even if I am a little bit off, if I didn't invest in that high dollar GPS accuracy, maybe I only invested in the 1 to 2 inch or 1 to 3 inch accuracy, that's still going to give me enough wiggle room to know that I'm planting in a nice tilled zone. I'm also going to start to look, I can see the waviness of the blades. Those blades do not create a hard pan because there's nothing to push against the bottom of them. They're making a slit and the waviness explodes the soil upwards. So I'm starting to look in here and I'm starting to think, you know what? I'm building a really nice zone.
Another consideration for fertilizer not only is the type, but who is going to be able to provide it. Typically, a lot of operations do not have their own fertilizer tender trucks. We have to rely on our ag retailers to be able to provide that fertilizer to us at a timely manner. If we're going to be thinking through a fertilizer system with a dry cart, such as a Kuhn Montag or a Soil Warrior, we need to make sure that we have a good relationship with our ag retailer and that they're capable of coming out and servicing and tending our machines. If not, that's when we need to start to think through a different method. That might be applying a liquid-based system to our machines, which we could then probably tender with our own tank or nurse trailer system. Soil conditions are critical in making our strips. If we go out and we make a strip when the soil is too wet or moist, we're probably going to generate a style of clods. Those clods can range anywhere in size from a quarter to the size of your fist. Clods have a hard time breaking down, and it takes time. If we do not allow enough time for those clods to break down, if we go in there with our planter, we're going to see very poor spacing due to the amount of poor ride quality our planter is going to experience going over those clods. With that being said, there's a lot more confidence when you start to create your strips or your zones in the fall. Fall time typically is drier here in the central Midwest, allowing us to be able to go in there and make the zones that we need. If we do make some clods, that's okay. They will probably overwinter and break down and be perfectly fine to plant in the following spring. If you still experience those clods in your zones or the strips in the spring, that's something we might want to consider going back over at another pass to be able to resolve and remove those. However, typically, if we have a good set of row cleaners on our planter, our row cleaners will be able to move those clods out of the way, still leaving us a nice place to place those seeds. One of the questions that I get asked is why strip till instead of no till? For me, the reasoning is when a strip till application, we're going to be disturbing the soil just enough to be able to place the seed directly where it needs to be. In a no-till environment, that's not going to be the case. With a strip till, we're also opening up the door to be able to place nutrients right where the seed is going to go. Some can say that we can do the same thing with a very nice planter. We can throw on a liquid fertilizer unit and do a 2x2 placement or something like that. But for me, when I think about strip till, it's opening up my windows for an easier planting season. If I add more things to my planter, that's just more headaches and more logistics that I'm going to be dealing with in a very tight window. Being able to use a strip till rig really does increase my season, my time, and my availability to hopefully be able to create those zones, whether in the fall or spring, based upon my time, the weather, and the availability.
I'm Mark Thompson from Badger, Iowa, north central Iowa, between Humboldt and Webster counties. I've been strip tilling now for almost 25 years. Give it a try. It may seem daunting at the beginning, but have a neighbor give you make some strips on some small parcels, or there's 500 different ways to strip till. You can all make it always work. There's some different things about it. Find a mentor, someone who's been doing it. That's what I started with. There wasn't many of us when we first started. Most of them were out of state, but made trips to Michigan, Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Illinois to learn how other people were doing it, and I like that.
Well, thank you for joining me today in our segment, Strip Till, on Crops TV. If you do have any questions about strip till, my first recommendation, go out, find somebody in your neighborhood, a neighbor, a fellow farmer, somebody who's already doing strip till. Learn from them. See what worked or what didn't work in their operation. If that's not the case for you, please reach out to your local extension agent, and they should hopefully be able to point you in the right direction. With that, I'm Ben Covington from Iowa State University.